I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm so thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Courtney Eaton, who plays Lottie in the series Yellowjackets. And in jumping back to when you were first cast in the role, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the early conversations that you had with Bart and Ashley, who are the showrunners of the series, because I love that it sounds like you talked very extensively about the delicacy of coming in and playing Lottie. Obviously, there's a lot in her backstory that we've seen throughout the show in terms of her mental health, in terms of medications that she's been put on, the way that the world has treated her, and the things that she's been told about herself over the years. But I kind of love that you wanted to create this open space without definitive answers for her as a character or for the audience. And so I was just very curious in how you landed on that decision being the best way, because there's so many different directions that you could have approached playing this character.
Yeah, 100%. When I signed on, Bart and Ashley and I had a chat, just because, one, I don't think Lottie is a villain, but two, I didn't want someone that was slightly portrayed as a villain to have to have that stigma and attachment. I think that there's a lot of that in Hollywood. But the good thing with Lottie is that she walks this fine line of, is it the wilderness? Is it previous traumas? Is it the trauma that's going on right now? Or is it something that's going on in her mind? So yeah, it was a conversation with that. And then as we kind of go on with the series, not that I know where we are going, we kind of have conversations on set of where this idea or thought is coming from with Lottie.
And in season 1, it was really interesting to watch the dynamic that developed between Lottie and between Laura Lee, because it really felt like Laura Lee was someone who anchored her in a lot of ways and really understood her in a way that none of the other girls did. And so when the plane crash happened, we kind of see Lottie as the first one running out in the water. What was the shift that you wanted to create in her as a character of, I've had this person that kind of gives me a way to tether and ground myself in a way that I now know doesn't exist around me?
Yeah, I think the relationship with Laura Lee is really interesting. I think Lottie is someone that has never really trusted her own mind and been comfortable with herself. I mean, her parents kind of left her to fend for herself and also just constantly tell her that something's wrong with her. So if you grow up that way, you're probably going to be stuck with that mindset for a bit. And I think Laura Lee is kind of this, symbol, and they have a bunch of conversations that I think Lottie for the first time can kind of look at herself and be like, oh, maybe this is a good thing. And then, when Laura Lee goes down in the plane, she's left with herself again in her own brain.
And even just when the plane crash first happens, I wanted to ask about how you considered the different dynamics within the group. I've heard you talk about Lottie being someone that you've always viewed as kind of like very much a one-on-one person versus someone that really thrives in a group setting. And there's so much at play amongst the ensemble in terms of how the characters all interact, what their different relationship dynamics are. And so what was the starting point for you in figuring out all the different interactions and what they were going to look like for her?
Yeah, I think going into the backstory, I mean, in the pilot, Lottie isn't featured that much, but she gives you enough information that, like I said, I think she's someone that doesn't trust herself, that is an empath, and is really sensitive to those around her because she's so aware of what's going on with herself. Yes, so someone who's as empathetic as Lottie is, and who's so self-aware almost that it's to her own undoing. I think she doesn't find it hard to connect to people, but there's always that barrier that she has up. So, and then going into the wilderness, I mean, each day we sometimes have conversations about like, my character's pissed off with you today for no reason, because we're stuck in a cabin, and just like little small thoughts like that is kind of how our group dynamic kind of comes, and then whatever gets thrown at us as we're filming the season.
I mean, in going into the second season as well, there's obviously, they've been in the wilderness for a little while. And now there's that added heightened element of, because it's the dead of winter, because food is super scarce, they can't forage in the way that they could before. And even just the claustrophobia of, we're literally stuck inside of this cabin. How did that make things much more heightened for you? And how did you feel like Lottie would kind of emotionally respond to just being in this very confined claustrophobic space?
Yeah, I had conversations with so some of the cast, and like Sophie and Elise and I are really close, and we lived together in the first season. But about it, it is interesting that every time we're in the cabin, we're all in the same room. And we had conversations about maybe like someone is sitting in the corner of the kitchen or trying to do this. But I think there is that element of staying attached to what you know, and we are all in this together. And and I do think there's an element of us just as actors coming in every day at the end of for wrap gifts for the crew. Some of us got a deck of cards and wrote "fuck this cabin" on it, because it was just so claustrophobic to be in there every day with crew, hair and makeup, let alone our giant ensemble cast. So I think just you feel it naturally on set, that claustrophobia, and it kind of bleeds into the scenes, which I think is really interesting.
Within that as well, what's the experience of going into filming a lot of those scenes? Because it's not even always the case of, Lottie's always not always front and center. Everybody has moments where they're front and center within the cabin. And then there's always just like little inflections and little things that we see in terms of character when you're all in the background of those shots as well.
Yeah, I think everyone keeps in mind that because pretty much every scene we shoot, we're all a part of. And so even if you're not on camera, you're doing something to help the other actors. And there might be little moments here and there that, like, for instance, last season, which the Citizen Detective fans clung on to, I was just like standing under one of the antlers, just like little things like that. And everyone's just in their own little world and trying to figure out themselves where their characters are going to go later in the season. So, yeah.
I mean, even the fact that, because you were saying there's so many moments like that where you're all in these scenes together and you've all been through the experience of stepping into this show, figuring out the tone of it, figuring out your characters together. What was the difference in coming into a lot of those scenes in season 2 and just having a sense of ease, and even just always being able to look to your side, to your left, to your right, and having this group of people all at the same stage of an experience?
Yeah, it was really interesting to go from season 1 to season 2. We bonded like no other on season 1, I think, because of just the COVID and quarantine circumstances. The borders were closed, we couldn't leave, and no one could come visit us. So we were each other's family, and we still are going into season 2. But it's interesting because we got to know each other so well that there's just like this unspoken language now when we're on set of like, so this person's needs a quiet day, this person is energized and wants to like get some jokes out, and there's so many of us that everyone can find their people throughout the day, and we all come together to do what needs to be done.
And talking a little bit about the external aspects of, kind of costume and hair and makeup and what that looks like, there's been kind of like little evolutions and shifts for Lottie in that as well. I've heard you mention even just the idea of like having little braids when Laura Lee was alive, because it's like she had someone who was nurturing her. And now obviously it's in the dead of winter, and just emotionally she's in a completely different space. And so what have been some of the most important or helpful external facets like that for you there?
I mean, just going into, by the end of the season, we have so many layers of dirt on us that we just can't scrub off no matter what, that I think we just start naturally falling into that world, and it's nice to come out at the end of the season. But yeah, little things here and there, or even, it's not even really costume, there will be little things on set like the trinkets, or who has the hunter's jacket and knife, and that will put you in a different, you and your character in a different mindset of like, okay, we're gonna go through a journey right now. Or at the beginning of the season with Lottie and her finding her leadership, I was talking to Daisy, with one of our directors, and she wanted Lottie's hood up a lot of the time to kind of give this religious, powerful aspect. So little things like that.
And you brought up the idea of, Lottie's going through this real journey of kind of landing in more of a space of leadership, but it's still very push and pull. Some people really gravitate towards her in that regards. And then there's also a lot of mistrust. And even if someone trusts her in that space, it's never consistent. So it doesn't feel like she's ever. So for you, does she always feel kind of a little unstable in terms of like what she trusts and what she believes in the way that other people are responding to her as well.
Yeah, Lottie is an interesting one to play. I always find it so hard when I get the question of like, tell me about Lottie, tell me who she is. And I'm like, she's so weirdly intertwined with me. And not that I'm going to start a cult, but I think we would make the same choices along the way. And I think if I got put in the wilderness, my brain would be my undoing. But Lottie has an interesting thing, especially at the beginning of this season, of kind of finding herself in a leadership role, slightly by her own doing and slightly by the pressure of others. And I talked with Karen about this later in the season, about how she's just a person that naturally has an energy that draws people to her. But people who are born to be leaders are usually split into two groups of people who can naturally do it and those that will probably need to end up following because they'll crumble under the pressure. And so I think Lottie is figuring out which one of those she is. But yes, there is this pull in the beginning of the season of the pressures of the ones in the group that look to her for guidance and the pressures that come with that, and then those that push against her.
And it's so interesting as well now in this space where we get to see present day Lottie as well in season 2, because we see that has become the space that she's gravitated towards as an adult, and she's very comfortable in that sort of position. And so has that influenced it all the way that you're thinking about her developing relationship, her confidence within herself, kind of having that endpoint of, okay, that's what ultimately she's working towards in the future?
Yeah, slightly. When Simone and I first met and talked about Lottie, our Lotties are so different and live in such different spaces. And it makes obviously makes sense for Simone to look back and see where we are, but we always talk about Simone as the light of Lottie, and the 90s version, she's pretty in the dark and not having a great time. There are times where I am starting to think about where her confidence coming in, but I think it's so early in the time that they have left out there that she's just at the beginning, and I don't want her to go full force too far, or she doesn't have much further to go.
No, that really makes sense in terms of all the facets of your character, because, you know, you don't know how much time and space you're going to have ultimately to fill with. And is that something where, kind of going back to conversations with the showrunners and with the writers, where they're able to kind of like help you find those lines of how much do we want to develop certain things within her as you go through different episodes and as you go into a new season?
Yeah, we're kept in the dark a lot. I remember later in the season, I had a few questions on set, just being like, these lines feel like they have a deeper meaning. What is that meaning? And I wouldn't get an answer, and it'd be like, it's in the feel and world of this, but you're on the right track, so we're not going to say anymore. So it's hard. You kind of have to come up with your own circumstances and ideas of what could possibly happen. But yeah, we don't really get that much.
And going back to some of the moments in season 1 as well, I did want to talk a little bit about the Doomcoming episode, because I think that was such a great moment for you as well in terms of character and performance, and in particular working with Catherine Cadler, who was the intimacy coordinator that worked with all of you, because there was so much choreography that went into what does this all look like, and in essence, kind of creating this very chaotic feeling scene, but in a way that's very structured in terms of how you all approached it. And so I was interested in how the choreography of a scene like that came together with her.
Yeah, Kathy is amazing. We worked with her a lot in season 2 as well. But yeah, that scene was interesting because there were so many moving parts and so many characters involved. And we kind of, during our lunch, and we had a few rehearsals of being like, and my arm will go here, and broke it down to the smallest of movements, that it just made everyone so comfortable that when we went to film the scene, we knew exactly where we were, how much we could push and where to go and what not to do. And I think it really let it open for us to kind of play around by making those boundaries. But yeah, Kathy's amazing.
And within that scene and that part of the episode as well, it really felt like Lottie was still grieving in a way where she felt like everybody had moved on. So even before everybody's high, it felt like she was already kind of like sitting in her feelings and very much outside of the group dynamic. And so how did that create the foundation of, okay, well, now if we add the fact that they're all high on shrooms, what does that look like if that's the emotional space that she was in to begin with?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she is the party pooper that sets everyone off on a bad trip. Yeah, I mean, Lottie's mental space a lot of the time is such a roller coaster of, and I mean, pretty much everyone's character, no one's really sitting smiling a lot of the time. But yeah, going into that scene, I remember specifically talking with Daisy about how she starts off singing that song and where that would come from within her. And then the whole Doom coming hunt Travis side of it is, yeah, a complex one. And I still don't even know if we all understand it. But so, it's so hard to talk about.
So some of the other moments that were really lovely to watch with her and really fascinating in terms of character development were those interactions with nature, and particularly the moment where she's able to kind of, it feels like she's communicating with the bear, and there's just like such calmness and such serenity. And when you read the script pages, did you have a kind of an immediate sense of what her energy was going to be like in that moment, or did some of it come about once you were there shooting a scene like that?
Yeah, it's interesting with Lottie because, like I said before, I feel like we share the same thought process and brain, which is why it's like when someone asks you to give a description of yourself and you're like, I don't know. So there are times where I know what the energy going into that is straight away from reading the script. Just from where Lottie lives, but then there's other times where she'll have a slight shift, and it will take a bit of playing around on set or talking with the directors to see another point of view that I haven't seen yet. Yeah, she's one you can't really like plan out.
Because on the other side of that spectrum, there's moments, going back to what you were saying about how she really just doesn't trust her mind a lot of the time. And I remember the moment where she was just like hitting her head against the glass window, and it felt like it was just this sense of really trying to escape herself. Do you tend to just work very instinctively in terms of finding in a scene and in a moment where you feel like she's able to kind of feel quite grounded in herself, and where she's just like trying to create that escape, because it always feels like she's trying to escape herself more than the external situation that she's in?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And especially later in season 3, there are more moments where they might have double meanings for the fans watching, but from where I approached it, it's Lottie in her most probably dark sense of trying to either like punish herself or so stressed that she doesn't know how to deal with it, that she takes it out in maybe not so healthy ways. But yeah, Lottie dances a lot between being grounded sometimes, and I think that's why you see her in the beginning of the season. There are times where she's comfortable leading, and then there's other times where you can start seeing the cracks. Yes.
She's also got quite a fun sense of humor that's very acerbic at times. She doesn't just stand back when people challenge her. It's like she'll come straight back with like an acerbic or a sarcastic comment. And so how did you find her sense of humor when you started playing her for a character that's so complex as she is?
I think it kind of naturally came in the pilot when we have that scene with the pilgrim hat and we're all snapping at Laura Lee. I think that was found kind of just by feeling the humor of how the other girls approached it and the group dynamic, and being like, oh, she would be totally okay with ripping apart this person with a hardcore joke or being a little bit more demure with someone else. So I really do think as a group and as a team, that kind of influences how we interact with each other as well.
And because, like you said earlier, you know, before, she is such an empath and she is so in touch with other people's emotions and feelings. And, you know, I think like watching her with Shauna is like really beautiful to see such an example of that so often. You know, how do you kind of go into scenes with your castmates, really looking at what's the energy that they're bringing in this particular moment for kind of seeing how Lottie's going to feel that and how she's going to respond to it?
Yeah, it's really interesting just because there are so many of us in a scene every day that it could go one way or another, or someone has a completely different idea. And there are times where we're all like, okay, what's the scene missing? It needs some pace. Maybe, and we'll just throw ideas around. But a lot of the times when we come in and say, as I have a few scenes with Sophie and Elise and Samantha and getting those more one-on-one, they just kind of come with their own fire and you look at it how, Lottie/me would react.
And with having worked on 2 seasons of the show at this point, what are some of the spaces in which you feel like you have such a comfort and confidence and understanding of her as a character? And then what are some of the aspects that still kind of create a lot of new challenges with everything that you're still having to create?
Yeah, I feel pretty comfortable in her darkness. That doesn't need much like explaining to me, and I know when it comes naturally. I think when she's standing her ground or being more confident, mostly the leading aspect of it, I think I find that difficult in finding her voice in that side, just because I do know where Simone ends up, but the timeline of it, I mean, even the electrocution psych ward scenes, I don't know what's happened between those / what's happened since she left the what did Juliet call it? Loony bin. So yeah, I think that is finding her own power, I think, is where I am still kind of figuring out. And there's a few challenges with that, because you might lean, it's hard with her because you can't lean too far one way, because next script that the writers will send, she'll be going the complete opposite. So she has to walk this line.
I mean, hearing that, it's so impressive how you've navigated through this character and everything that you've created with her. I've loved all the episodes that I've seen so far from the new season and can't wait to see more. Thank you so much, Courtney.
Of course. Thank you so much. Sorry, my brain's a little scrambled.